on Bengaliness in the next generation. I'm joined by Bengalis from various professional backgrounds and age groups who all have their own unique experiences and insight on what being Bengali means to them in the UK and being part of this generation. Just before we begin our Adda, I would like to introduce the Bengalis sitting next to me today. First we have Shurmila Vishash. Shurmila grew up here in Birmingham and she's just recently graduated from UCL. She studied politics, philosophy and economics and will start working in marketing in September. She is an avid participant in the arts and is trained in Bharatanatyam, singing and dancing, and acting as well. She continues to pursue these alongside her work. Next we have Shomunil Gupta. Shomunil is a recent graduate from Queen Mary's University London in biomedical engineering. He has experience living both in the UK and in India as a Bengali. We also have Dr. Abhijit Pal, who was born in Kolkata and came to the UK with his parents in 1970 at the age of 7. He lived first in Northern Ireland and then Newcastle upon Tyne. His parents, like most immigrants from Kolkata at the time, were both healthcare professionals. He studied dentistry in London and after graduating he settled in Birmingham, where he's lived since 1987. Abhijit met his future wife Shunchita, also a Bengali, in India, and she joined him in the UK in 1994. Their son, born in Birmingham, is now 28 years old. And finally we have Shuhela Mukherjee, known as Tini by her family and friends. She's an incoming first-year medical student at Imperial College London, and she's looking forward to starting uni life and meeting others. In her free time, she enjoys painting, cooking, and trying new foods, reading, and spending time with family and friends. So can we have a round of applause for our participants today? Great. Now before we begin, let me just paint you a picture of a Bengali's ideal day in the life. Maybe a Sunday like today. So it usually starts with reluctantly waking up, eating a breakfast of luchi, shadalu torkari, and then perhaps listening to some Rabindra Sangeet or reading the Ananda Bajar of today. We then usually have pathar mangsho for lunch or maybe even ilish mach, and that's followed by a long afternoon bhat khur. And then the evening is possibly spent watching Uttam Kumar movies or doing adda over cha and bhajan. However, as Bengalis in the UK, we can't always have the same lifestyle as an Indian Bengali might, living in India. But I'm sure that we all try and retain our culture and our traditions in our own way. So, as a Bengali in this generation in the UK, I'm also sure that our environment and our upbringing makes a huge difference on how Bengali we might feel. And we have Dr. Abhijit here, who grew up in the UK in a very different generation from the rest of us. And while there is still a lot of underlying intolerance and prejudice in the UK now, I'm sure that in the UK he was brought up in, it must have been quite different. So I'd be really interested, Dr. Pal, to hear about perhaps your upbringing as a Bengali in this country, and maybe a little bit about your family life and how being Bengali felt those years ago.
Thank you very much, Una. Thank you for inviting me to the panel, and welcome. Well done on getting this set up. I am the odd person out on the panel, clearly, in many ways, particularly in age, only being a few decades older than everyone else. But obviously, as you've said, my upbringing is quite different. I came with my parents who were both working in the NHS, and we started life in the UK in an area where there was very few Asians, that's Northern Ireland, let alone Bengalis. So the adjustment was quite great at that time. When we moved to England, there was more exposure to, if you like, Asian culture and Bengali culture in particular. But I guess growing up in the 70s and 80s in the UK was quite different. Interestingly enough, discrimination was faced, but it's quite different to what it is now. Certainly in Northern Ireland, we had a very good time. We were actually, even though there was a lot of political problems at the time, we were made to feel very welcome there. And that's sometimes the experience of people who have been brought up in areas outside urban cities, that sometimes because the population hasn't been exposed as much to Malaysian culture, they are sometimes made to feel more welcome than if you were growing up in an urban area. In fact, for me, to understand actually discrimination required me to actually move to England, because that's when it became more apparent in what was going on because of the numbers. In terms of maintaining my culture, I think the first question I'd like to ask you is, what do you actually, you gave a very nice description of, a Bengali Sunday, and whilst I recognize that, I think if you go to Kolkata now, that's not something you'll recognize now. So, that big classical Bengali culture, I don't think is prevalent as much in Kolkata now as it certainly was decades ago, probably less prevalent now. I think I was lucky because both my parents made an effort to maintain language, and I think that's the gateway for a lot of people to be able to maintain the culture. Bengali culture is a very language-based culture, and if you have access to the language, then it's unfortunate, and we can discuss this later, you have access to culture in many ways. And because my parents encouraged me to maintain my Bengali language skills in the home, that allowed me, as I grew up, to be able to access language. I don't want to say too much more, but does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, of course.
I want others in the panel also to have their say.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was really interesting what you said about how the description of a Bengali's life that I just gave might not even be relevant in Kolkata nowadays, because as we know, culture isn't something which is static, it is ever changing, and I think it's interesting how in Kolkata, a city which is also like rapidly urbanized, that sense of Bengali culture has also shifted over time. But what you said about the Bangla language being kind of the cornerstone of the way culture is transmitted to future generations, I thought that was really interesting. So I was wondering if perhaps any of the other panelists had any thoughts on how important the Bangla language has been to you, whether it's been a barrier which has seemed almost insurmountable, because as members of this generation, sorry, I'm just gonna... Yeah, so about the Bangla language, I think it's almost impossible for us to learn it as fluently or get the same grasp on it as the older generation. So I was wondering if anyone, maybe Dr. Pal, if you had any thoughts on how language is perhaps a barrier for accessing Bengali culture, or whether it's more of a tool which can be used and, shaped over time.
I think it makes it much more easier if you know how to read and write Bengali. But I wouldn't say it's like a hard stop barrier, right? There's lots of kids that grew up over here with Bengali parents. A lot of them who can't speak Bengali at all, who still go to these events, who still participate, and who still part of the culture. Here and there, it's not sort of competition, like how much you're supposed to do it or how little. But as long as you're engaging with even some of it here and there, it's worth it. Like to keep that tradition going, generation after generation and stuff like that. But yeah, the language obviously helps out a lot, because you can connect with older generations. A lot of them who, would be more inclined to speak with you or even engage with you socially if you did know the language, right? So that's what I think.
Yeah, just to add on from that, I thought it was interesting how you said about connecting with older generations. But I think the thing I'm most grateful for with talking Bangla enough, my mum's not here, she'll say I don't speak enough, but I can, is that I can go back home to Kolkata and I can speak to my grandparents, and I'm lucky enough to be able to do that and go alone. Like, I've managed to make the trip just me, stay with my family, and there's a lot of my friends who are really shocked that I can do that because they don't speak the language enough to be able to navigate their family and city without their parents there. So as much as we'd like it not to be a barrier, I think it is really important to be able to communicate with other parts of your family who might not be able to speak back to you in English, for example.
I think, adding into that, I think I would say the Bengali language, I think I would say I wouldn't really call it a barrier in that sense, because I would say it was kind of the first step into understanding my culture. As someone who went to a Catholic school, I wasn't really surrounded by people from the Bengali culture for most of the time. But at home, my parents taught me how to speak Bengali, and I became very fluent in it. And in the future, I'd like to learn to read and write it as well. But I think, not only does it allow me to talk to my family at home and in India as well, but I can also connect to other Bengalis that I've met at school and to be puja groups as well. And also something else that I would like to add is learning the Bengali language and learning the meaning of it. So because I do Kathak, so dancing as well, learning the meaning around it. I'm not just dancing just for the sake of it, but I'm also able to understand why I'm dancing and the meaning of the dances I'm doing as well.
Really interesting. We'll come on to dance and the arts a bit more later. I found it really fascinating how a lot of you didn't see the Bengali language as a barrier, more so because I guess we've all had the privilege of being taught how to speak and understand it by our parents, and that's a huge privilege when connecting with the older generation and being in touch with our culture in that way. Even though most of us here have grown up in the UK, you actually spent a lot of your childhood in Kolkata, right?
Yeah.
Was it between reception and
It was between reception till end of secondary school.
Okay,
yeah. So decent chunk.
Yeah. So I was wondering how you kind of faced the transition from moving back to the UK after the end of secondary school, or how you felt the UK was perhaps very culturally different from growing up in Kolkata, and maybe how that impacted your identity as a Bengali person living both in Kolkata and here, which most of us here haven't had the privilege of.
Yeah, I mean, the switch from reception here back there, obviously I don't remember much of it because that was a long time ago, but it was kind of different because obviously, like I said, there's a big cultural shift when you move over there, and what it entails. Like I said to you before, accents. It might not seem like much, but changing from a place where you understand everybody for a while, and then going to some place else where the accents just rapidly change. It takes a while to get into it, making friends. I mean, anyway, moving from one place to another, wherever you go, social changes are there. Making friends is harder, but when there's such big cultural shifts, it becomes even more difficult, right? But you adapt to it, you get better at it. And yeah, I'd say coming back was actually kind of different because when I came back over here, there wasn't that much change as when I left. It kind of felt really, really similar in the way there was no different bridging, understanding of accents. None of that was there. Everyone pretty much understood me really well. And the thing is, I would say, the education system is kind of different. Talk about that, into detail, because the way we're educated over there, how competitive, learning focused, whereas over here, I wouldn't exactly call it slacking, but it's more much more relaxed, right? So those kinds of changes, they make massive difference. I would say, when it comes to my identity, it did help shaped me in the kind of person that I am here and there. But yeah, in sense, being able to speak the language kind of like negated most of those changes anyway. Like when I came back there, it was kind of fine. And over here, the only thing that say really changed was, apart from the education, the social life. Obviously, we all make the joke that we have strict parents, not that much social life here and there. But when you go over there, you see how strict everyone is when it comes to people's social lives. Come back here and you're like, you got it really easy, social life-wise. And yeah, that's it. That was a much more bigger change. Like seeing everyone so intense versus everyone much more relaxed. Yeah. And again, it changed when I went to university. But yeah, it was definitely interesting.
Thank you. And would you say that growing up in Kolkata helped you feel more Bengali in a sense, just being in that environment?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there are so many things that I have experienced that if you never went to the city, let's say you grew up here and here alone, even if you did learn the language, there are lots of things like, visiting Park Street, like, things that you have to be there to really understand it, right?
Yeah.
Seeing like different sites, traveling on like a rickshaw, stuff like that, which you could explain to someone here, it just wouldn't be the same though, would it, as experiencing it over there. So yeah, it definitely helped me get more in touch with being a Bengali, wanting to know more about, where we're from and stuff like that. Because when you grow up here, yeah, your parents can convince you to learn the language, participate in events, but until you have that like inner desire to actually know more about where you came from, what your culture is like, you won't get that deep into it. And I think like going there and living for like a while definitely helped with like wanting to know more about my culture.
Thank you. I especially like what you said about having like the inner desire to learn more about your culture.
Right.
Because I don't think Bengali culture or any culture can be like enforced upon anyone. I think that culture has to be something that naturally comes through. You have to have the urge to connect with your heritage in that way. And we've spoken a lot about language today, how that's been a means of accessing culture. But of course that isn't the only way. I think a really great way of accessing culture, any culture, not just Bengali culture, but I think the arts can be a really useful tool in that. I've noticed that when I visit India every year, and I stay with my grandparents in their neighborhood. So my mom's side isn't actually from Kolkata, we're from Shiliguri, which is in North Bengal. And where my grandparents live there, it's a much smaller city than Kolkata. And so there is still that kind of para or like neighborhood feel. So in the evenings, you can hear like young girls singing Rabindra Sangeet in their houses. Or I know that a lot of young people there are all engaged in some kind of creative pursuit, whether that's singing or art or acting or dance. And I know that Mila is really involved in singing and dancing especially. So I was wondering how you've kind of seen the arts as a means to access Bengali culture, or even just Indian culture in general, and I guess how that's been helpful for you and what you've learned from that.
Yeah, so I grew up doing Bharatanatyam and I also sang, actually studied under Shinshita Mashi, which is Indian as well. But it was a really great way to access Indian culture, and I could start there. If anyone knows anything about Bharatanatyam, it's a South Indian art. So it was very different. I know you said you did Kathak and the language helped you connect with that, but for me it was maybe a little bit more of a disconnect from Bengaliness in particular, because I was learning a lot more about, South Indian culture, like, they call their gods by the different names that we do, and it was kind of, I didn't really understand sometimes, like, we were talking about the same God, for example, or even in terms of the language, like all the dances that all the songs that we danced to were in Tamil. So I, ended up learning a lot of the Tamil vocabulary, and whilst it was a very great way to get in touch with Indian culture, it did seem like I was missing the Bengaliness from it. At one point I really considered like maybe I should have done that because it's a North Indian art form and I probably would have felt a bit more at home. I also wasn't surrounded by a lot of other Bengalis in my class. That being said, just having that training in the art form still really helped me to pursue like the Bengali culture in other ways. For example, like when it came to puja time, my mum would ask me if I could choreograph a dance to some kind of Bangla gaan, and you know, she just filmed it, put it on Facebook, and it's just something that she wanted me to do so that I could still be in touch with the Bangla culture. And sometimes, you know, I was a bit reluctant or hesitant to do it, but I am glad that she made me because it allowed me to take my training from something very South Indian but apply it to my own culture. And in terms of singing as well, when I was a lot younger, I trained in Hindustani classical music, so it was a very good way to get in touch with the more North Indian side of things, and you know, it allowed me to learn a few Bangla gaans, and I learned to play the harmonium, so that's still a skill that I carry with me today, and I can still play it and pick up some songs here and there, which is a great skill that I'm really grateful that I have. And again, it was just a great way to get in touch with Indian culture as a whole. But I sadly didn't continue that after I was about 11. So then I went into, you know, English, classical and musical theatre training, which was very, very far removed. But I guess if you have the skill to sing, you can sing anything. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I thought it was really cool what you said about how maybe it didn't teach you about Bengali culture, but more broadly Indian culture, but how you were able to use those like transferable skills in a way to apply that to Bengali culture. And it also makes me think about how I guess Bengaliness as an idea isn't really just defined by these like national borders, and how, I guess moving on to how there are lots of people who might not be ethnically Bengali but may have assimilated into Bengali culture, just as the generation before us have assimilated into British culture living in the UK. I was wondering if, Shuhila, you had any thoughts about, I guess, the idea of Bengaliness as a concept and how, I guess, people can assimilate into Bengali culture without having the need to be ethnically Bengali.
Yeah, definitely. So I think a good person to talk about right now would be Usha Yutu. So I've done some research on her. So she was born into a Tamil family, and she's renowned for her Bangla singing, and she's very in touch with Bengali culture. And I think being born into a Tamil family, but then finding a passion for the Bengali culture and how she's able to kind of shift her life so that she can focus on what she's passionate about. She grew up like learning how to sing Bangla songs, and now she's quite renowned, as you all know, for like singing. And then she also married in Kolkata as well. I think she married to a Bengali as well. So although she came from such a different background, how she's been able to like assimilate herself into the Bengali culture through doing that and not being afraid to do that as well. I think she has the support. I think that's quite interesting, and also like the fact that she wears like the bindi on her head with the letter Ko for Kolkata. I think it shows that she's quite proud of, even though she's not directly from the Bengali culture, she embraces it through her singing and like her fashion and style. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think the way you spoke about how there are people who have moved to Bengal and adopted Bengali culture, I guess they've also still held on to their own cultural beliefs. I guess her Tamil identity must be equally important to her, even though she's, I guess, assimilated into Bengali culture quite a bit as well. In the same way, I think it's also our responsibility as Bengali people in Britain to maintain our Bengali culture within this country. And I find that really interesting also when considering the idea of like Indianness alongside Bengaliness, because when we say Bengali, obviously seeing everyone here, we know that we're referring to the idea of Indian Hindu Bengalis from West Bengal, but I'm sure a lot of us have experienced kind of being in school or university or in the workplace and telling someone you're Bengali, but then perhaps assuming that you're from Bangladesh, because obviously there is a sizable Bangladeshi population within this country, that sometimes
they're definitely greater in number than the Indian Bengali population. And also, when we consider our identity of being Indian, I think that is often also, I guess it doesn't always translate that well into Bengali culture, because when we see Indian culture in the mainstream, whether we look at, for example, like food, like if you go to an Indian restaurant, a lot of British people here love their Indian food, but often it tends to be Punjabi food or North Indian food that they see as Indian. And if we turn to other like facets of culture, like say movies, even then Bollywood seems to be, I guess, the main kind of Indian film that is celebrated. And then I guess also religion being a key part of how culture is maintained in the UK. While we do have festivities like Durga Puja and Kali Puja, it seems that in most religious environments like temples, these are mainly run by, say, like South Indian people or Gujarati people. So it doesn't always feel like Bengali culture is as like prominent in the mainstream media, or it doesn't always gain as much of a spotlight. I was also wondering that since Dr. Pal, you've observed this country for a long time and seen its kind of like cultural cross-section in a way, I bet you must have also interacted with a lot of South Asians and people from the Indian subcontinent in your workplace. So I was wondering if you think that Indian Bengalis are on par almost with retaining their culture in comparison to other cultural identities within the UK?
Well, that's an interesting question because where's your data and evidence? I would say, as all of us are scientists, in saying whether we do or don't. The evidence of this weekend, this panel, might suggest to some that even though we have got a much smaller diaspora than the other Asian communities, are we maintaining our culture greater or not? So there's but in a more general answer to your question, I think it's difficult to know whether we are still maintaining or not. I think numbers is a big issue. We are not just a minority, we are a teeny, really minority within a minority in this country. So I think we have to accept that, okay? And as such, obviously it's harder to build up that community. The second point, and I think we discussed this before, is the way, if you like, some of the other Asian communities migrated to this country. Everyone, I would say almost everyone who migrated to the UK as from Kolkata or from West Bengal came here as a professional. They came here as a professional, whether it was a medic. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'll just repeat that last bit. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So it's me. All right. Okay. So the first point I made was that do we have any evidence that Bengalis aren't maintaining their culture as well as other communities? Because by the evidence of this weekend, we may be. Second thing I said is that in terms of numbers, our community is a tiny minority within a minority in this country. So we've got very small numbers. And third point is that the way Bengalis from India migrated is quite different. Most Bengalis from India migrated here as professionals, either as doctors or engineers or teachers. So when they migrated to this country, they migrated into a very privileged position in this society. They were able to enter a profession, a job, a career structure straight away, and they could become independently wealthy or have independent means quicker. If you look at the Gujarati and Punjabi populations that came here, first of all, many were thrown out of their countries. Let's not forget, many were thrown out of East Africa and ended up here with nothing. Others maybe migrated with less qualifications or whatever, had to start work as laborers. For them, they had to build a sense of community very quickly. Okay, so that was their strength. Their foundation was having that sense of community, because of how they came to this country, and that I think has helped to maintain their culture in a way that Bengalis are generally a lot more independent. They are probably a lot more spread out in the country, a lot more, and as such, I think it's probably been harder for parents in this country to be able to maintain that level of, because it's just really from the home that you can do it. And I think kids are also wanting to have an identity, and that's probably what I have. When you want to know what your identity and what your background is. Okay, I mean, I identify myself as British. There's no two ways about it, and everyone here is British, but many people think that, well, I'm British because I've got a passport, but actually I'm Indian. Really, I actually identify myself 100% as British, but of Indian heritage, okay? And that's really important to me, that I'm British, so I bought into the, if you like, the culture of this country, and what this country stands for and everything, but at the same time, I identify myself as Indian, and I think that's the first thing. The first step is that having that identity as an Asian, because that's how we are as Asians. The second step is, can you identify yourself, do you identify yourself as a Bengali within that, okay? And there's going to be a huge spectrum in this country. We talked about language, there's a huge spectrum of language. You've got people that can understand but can't say. You've got people that can understand and say a little bit. You've got people that are fluently conversant but can't read and write. And so I think, you've got to be able to allow all groups to be able to access the culture this way, and allow, because you're going to talk about the next generation and what the future is, yeah? Because the future is going to be quite different from, what the future looked like in the 1980s, I know you came from Kolkata and you migrated here, as I did, but let's face it, lifestyles in urban areas in India aren't a lot different to lifestyles here. There's a little bit of difference because social media, film, television, there is a cultural shift, there's no doubt about it, but it's a smaller shift now than it was 30 years ago. And if you look 30 years from now, there's going to be a lot of mixing, the cultures. And I think that's really exciting for us. And I think we need to make sure that future generations can still have a sense of identity of where they're from, but also identify with where they are now.
Thank you. I thought it was especially kind of important, and I liked how you drew the distinctions between, I guess, the Bengali community here and other communities like the Punjabi or Gujarati community, and how forming a sense of community was perhaps more important or urgent for them, as they didn't kind of go into these professional backgrounds immediately like the Indian Bengali community did. And I think that we're really privileged in a sense that we didn't have to see community as this lifeline as these other cultures may have. But in saying that, we have managed to retain our culture through events and panels like this today. And I do also want to kind of show some gratitude to the Bangladeshi community that we have in the UK for maintaining our culture in ways that we may not have. I actually spent about 4 or 5 years of my life living in Tower Hamlets in East London, where there's a massive Bangladeshi community, as I'm sure a lot of you will know. And so I grew up in Tower Hamlets in the East End, and most of my classmates were actually from Bangladesh. And so in a weird way, I was kind of connected through Bengali culture to Bengali culture in the way that we all knew that we could speak Bangla, even though they may speak a different dialect, which usually tends to be Sylheti with Bangladeshi people living in the UK. But it was really interesting because even in my primary school back in East London, in the library of our primary school, we had the book Hojo Borolo by Shukumar Rai, which was really kind of random to see in a British classroom. But I think it was also in those weird ways that I connected with Bengali culture almost subconsciously. And then we also can't forget about Brick Lane and Bangla Town as a kind of hub or a centre of Bengali culture in the UK. I still remember the way I learnt how to read and write Bangla was I visited Brick Lane for the first time, and I went into a boyer dukan, a bookshop, and I saw a book that was aimed at young children, teaching them how to read and write Bangla. And I was kind of inspired to pick that up and show to my parents, oh, please teach me how to read and write Bangla. And I also can't forget that the reason I wanted to connect with Bengali culture was because my best friend at the time, who was actually from Hong Kong and spoke Cantonese, she knew how to read and write Cantonese, and I kind of felt a bit jealous that I didn't know how to read and write Bangla. I felt a bit kind of dominated in that sense. So I also wanted to connect with my culture in that way. And it's only because of Brick Lane and Bangla Town that I was able to connect with my culture in that way. And it's only because of my Cantonese friend in a very globalized, multicultural London that I was able to kind of feel the urge to connect with my Bengali culture. I also know that Shomali, because you went to Queen Mary's in London, which is in East London. Right. I was wondering if maybe you had similar experiences learning from the Bangladeshi community, even though we may have small cultural and religious differences to them. Perhaps how you felt being Indian Bengali with a lot of Bangladeshi people around you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what you said was spot on. It's the same situation. Because initially, when I went to Queen Mary's, the same thing happened. And I would say people, I'm Bengali. And then the first thing they come to the conclusion was I was Bangladeshi, right? Which is just how it is. I mean, like we were saying, that they came here first and they have much more bigger numbers. So naturally, you know, everyone is going to think in that way. You know, there's no blame there, but it's a good situation to learn from, you know. Because, they still maintain parts of the culture. Because, I mean, remember, we were from the same place eventually, right? Yeah. So there is bits and pieces of them there. And the fact that there is such a strong presence around like Queen Mary's, Tower Hamlets, that East London side, means it's also like much more easier to like slip into the culture, especially like as someone who's not been there for a while. You know, like I said, Whitechapel Station is the only station that has the name written in Bengali, isn't it? Right? Yeah. So that never would have happened if the Bangladeshis were never there. So that's helped us out as well. So I think the contribution they made, definitely really interesting, really great. And also promotes others, because like I was saying before, there are a lot of kids that they don't really, when they grow up here, they don't understand how important it is, or you know, there are other priorities in mind when it comes to like learning about culture and stuff like that. But once you make that kind of shift, especially to a London university, no matter where it is, whether it's in East London or King's, any of the big four really, you start wanting to learn more, you know, and the fact that there's already an established community there, especially when it comes to like food and stuff like that, just makes life easier, doesn't it, you know? And so that's pretty much it from my side.
Thank you. I'd now kind of like to shift our discussion into thinking about the future, maybe the future of Bengaliness. And I'd like to open up this question to all of you can chip in. I was wondering what you think the future of being Bengali in the UK is, and perhaps how you want to spread Bengaliness to future generations. Obviously we're living in an increasingly globalized world, which Dr. Pal clearly brought to our attention, and how Bengali culture is mixed in with our British identities as well as our Indian identities, and how I guess these different facets of culture aren't mutually exclusive because they overlap in a lot of ways. We all very strongly, I'm sure, identify as British, but also Bengali, but also Indian. So I was wondering how all of you think Bengali culture's future is in the UK, especially as someone from this generation.
I think it's going to be harder to kind of access that culture. Being like first generation, so my parents moved in and I was born here. I think because I had them to kind of guide me through the Bengali culture and how to settle into a place where it's not as accessible as it would be in India. I think I'm very lucky to have that, but I think when I grow up, obviously things will be different. It might be harder, but I think through programs like this, different associations that you can join, so there's so many in Birmingham, there's different, like, so for example last month I went on a Hindu shibir, and it was different Bengali Hindus from all across England, so kind of branching out further from Birmingham, meeting other people from London, Leicestershire. I think doing things like that, and obviously doing other extracurriculars such as dance and classical Indian singing as well, will help me keep my culture, and hopefully I can pass that on to the future generation as well. So I think, yeah, also connecting with people my age, so like how we've connected today, and kind of keeping that community and kind of establishing a home away from India. Like, it's kind of, it will help, even though it will become like more difficult.
Yeah, just to add as well, I think, as you said, it will be really difficult. We obviously had our parents, and as much as sometimes I'd like to complain about now playing some Rabindra Sangheet in the car on the way to wherever we were going, like, it allows me to keep in touch with that, but I can't say that when I grow up, my kids are going to be listening to that, they're probably going to be listening to Rihanna. So it will be a lot harder. And as well with the language, again, we had our parents, but you know, if whoever you end up with is in Bengali, it's a lot harder to pass it on. When you have two Bengali parents, it's so much easier to pass on the language, pass on the food. But that being said, I really would love to learn how to cook some more stuff from my mum. I think we haven't had a chance to talk about food today, but Bengali food is such a massive part of our culture. So just learning those things, being able to cook that, being able to pass that on, I think is a really important thing. And just as was said, just having this community, you know, we probably are the minority of the minority, but we're growing in numbers and we get to know a lot more people, and just having, you know, family, friends that are Bengali, and it's just a good community to have to build off of in the future. Thank you.
I think the future is events like this, you know, like stuff like UKBC. You want to see, like, in the event list, more and more events being done by people in our age bracket, you know, like that early teenage to mid 25 sort of range, where like more young people are doing events like this, you know, like panels, discussions. That itself will, you know, start building the future up, because, you know, we don't have the numbers, we've discussed this before. It's not gonna like magically increase overnight, but slowly over time with events like this, you know, when it comes to like celebrations and stuff. Because like, look, there's a lot of us people in this age bracket that, you know, we're busy with stuff, university, stuff like that. So it's not always possible to like engage with every aspect of this culture, especially over here. But when it does happen, it incites other people in our age group to try and do the same thing. Like, hopefully next UKBC there's like 2 panels like this, you know, maybe one more extra poem recitation, one more play, one more song, you know, by someone like us. And the more that happens, the more people start engaging with it, and then the more people have that like inner desire to actually want to know more, you know, get engaged. I think that's the future.
Yeah, the future. I actually don't agree that it's going to become more difficult. I think it's actually going to become easier, but it's going to be different. If you are comparing to the very classical Bengali art forms that your parents, my parents, brought to this country, I think that very tight, conservative, classical art form in maintaining that. I don't mean classical as in the type of music my wife is singing. I mean just in general, that more conservative art form, I think that will be difficult. But what you're going to see is some kind of hybrid which keeps key elements of Bengaliness, as you call it, and integrating that with this society to get a new form of Bengaliness. I think that's what the future is. And I think the future of that is also a very individual thing. For a person, it's an individual thing how they identify with. We're talking about a society which is very diverse here. You know, you're not talking about Kolkata, you're talking about a society that's very diverse. and there's lots of influences. So an individual might only want to access their Bengali culture to a certain extent, but they should be allowed and be proud to be able to do that. So I think you're going to see this coming, and I'll tell you why it's going to become easier. First of all, the numbers are going to be increasing, because the first generations that came, they're going to have kids, and they're going to have kids. So there's going to be this community which I talked about, in a small way that's going to build up. Number two, communication is so much easier with social media. Access to it is all over the place. So if someone's actually got an interest in knowing where they're from and what language their ancestors spoke, they only need to go to YouTube and they'll get it in 30 seconds, okay? Third is travel, which I think is going to be really important. One of the things that really helped me was going back to Kolkata, but not going back in the way many kids are told to go back. Well, go back and go and visit your grandparents and your uncles and that, stay in Kolkata and then we'll come back home. And those things are important. But for me, my parents gave me the ability to independently travel from the age of 18 in India. So between my A-levels, between finishing school, I spent 2.5 months there, and I did a bit of travel outside of Kolkata. And to really be able to explore and see, that's going to become a lot easier. So for individuals who really want to identify with the background, I think it's going to become easier. And I think the future is very bright for those that want to do this. And I think it's the role of parents now and future parents to at least allow your kids to access it while they're young, through language, through access to films, through travel. And then if you build that appetite, then some, as they grow up, like all of you have, will want to learn more and want to access that. But there may be others who just don't want to. And they're perfectly happy having their British identity, having their British values, and saying like that. And they should be respected for that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Pal, for that hopeful message. I think what we've gathered from our discussion today is that firstly, Bengali culture and no culture can be enforced upon people. It's something that I guess as the next generation we have to have our own inner desire and our urge to connect with that culture. But what can be done is that Bengali culture can be made more accessible through events like today. It was really lovely to hear about how Dr. Pal, you visited India by yourself for like 2.5 months, and you were able to interact directly with Bengali culture on your own terms, independently. And also, I guess that links to how Mila, even though you, I guess, interacted with Indian dance forms, you took stuff that you'd learned from that and applied it to Bengali dance or singing, and kind of learned from Indian culture but made it your own by interacting with Bengali art forms too. We've also talked a lot about how the Bangladeshi community and how, although we're a minority in a minority, we've, I guess, been supported a lot by the wider Bangladeshi community and learned how to retain our culture through them as well, which Shomuni talked really well about. And we've also seen how there are a lot of people who may not be ethnically Bengali but have assimilated into Bengali culture, which Shuhila talked about really well too. So I hope that we can have more discussions like this in the future with our generation and generations in the future on how Bengali culture can be advanced and I guess how we can feel more Bengali. And even though the future is uncertain, as Dr. Pal said, it may not be necessarily difficult, but it will definitely be different. But I am very hopeful about Bengaliness in the future, and I hope that from listening to our panelists today, you two also have a sense of hope for that Bengali identity in the UK in the years to come. If we could all give a big round of applause to our panelists today. And thank you very much to UKBC, especially Onnoyanko, for giving me this platform today. It's been an honor to share this platform with so many honorable guests, and enjoy the next panel. Do we have time for questions? I was told there was like a 5-minute thing. Okay. Yes.
This is my question to all of you here. Thank you for your time. It was really insightful. As a mother of two Bengali kids who are not very confident in speaking but take part in every single production, Tasher Desh korche এই ফ্রাইডে, কিন্তু বাংলায় বাড়িতে খুব একটা কথা বলতে চায় না। আমি ছেড়ে দিয়েছি, গানের মধ্যেই শিখুক, নাচের মধ্যেই শিখুক, নাটকের মধ্যেই শিখুক। My question is, as parents, is it okay to let them grow and flower and flourish as usual, or do we need to be really persistent? You have to learn this and you should be, this is your identity. Without this, what is the right balance? Am I making sense, or is it too hard?
No, yeah, I think what you're asking is where there's difficulty in them picking up Bengali, to what extent should you push the ability to speak Bengali? Can I just give you an example of, if you look around the community, the number of mixed marriages that have taken place where one spouse is of Bengali origin, the other spouse isn't even of Indian or Asian origin, they are completely different culture, and how in those successful marriages, how the spouse who isn't Bengali is able to pick up, understand a lot of the cultural norms, the cooking. We haven't even talked about food as a cultural form, by the way. You know, the fine arts and performing arts. We haven't talked about classical music, which is actually one of my gateway accesses to Indian culture, which doesn't need language. I think if they aren't able to, or they can't for whatever reason pick up the Bengali language, they should be allowed to have access to all the other ways they can still do it. That's what I think, you know.
I mean, for me, I'd say it's one of those situations where nobody likes being forced to do anything, right? You know, after a certain point of time, you know, they'll want to learn it on their own. You know, like, you know, when you were saying how, like, one of your friends, she could speak Cantonese, and you just, then you're like, you intimidated, and you said, yeah, you know what, let me learn as well, right? It's one of those situations where kids will come to the conclusion on their own, right? And through so many of those different ways where you can engage with the culture in so many different ways, language is not the only way to do it. It's just, it's a tool, it's a helping hand. And, you know, eventually, they'll just get it on their own. If they don't, it's still great. Because at least they're participating in the events, which is really, to me, what matters most. Because that's how you engage with the culture.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you there. I think obviously language is especially important within Bengali culture because of historical events like the Bhasha Andolon and the Bengali language movement, where people literally gave their lives for the Bangla language, and I think that's why a lot of us see it as so integral, which it definitely is. But I think I would completely agree with both of you there that language should not be seen as this insurmountable barrier or something which should act as an obstacle in terms of accessing Bengali culture. I'm sure that Mila and Shuhala will agree that the arts are, if not equal, but an even better tool than language. And I think language is also intrinsically connected to the arts, so even if they can't speak Bangla super well, they are probably indirectly engaging with it through natok, gan, nat. And these things I don't think can be put into like boxes. I think they all blend into each other quite well, and language is almost like an underlying part of the arts in general. But I think with what we've said today, nothing should be like forced down anyone's throat or enforced in terms of culture. I think that's something that we've also spoken about, how it came within us naturally, and we had the urge to learn more, and so we did. Yeah, I'm sure you guys will agree.
So I do agree, but I am going to give my personal experience, where I was a very reluctant child to speak to Ma in Bangla. She refused to speak to me unless I'd speak back to her in Bangla. And whilst I hated her at the time, looking back on it now, I'm super grateful, because you know, and I was so reluctant that she tried to get me to read and write, and I can't. Like, she'd sit me down and I'd shout and scream and walk away. Like, that never happened. But she wouldn't speak to me unless I was going to speak back to her in Bangla. She'd just stop the conversation, which was infuriating. But now I'm very grateful for it, and I think it's definitely a personal choice. It's up to you how much you want them to be able to speak it. I think for me, obviously, general conversational Bangla is like, I don't think it's that big of a barrier, but there's some things, such as me and Ma always talk about the word naka, right? There is no English translation for the word, and I can use it in that context, and no one else knows what I'm talking about except for other Bengalis. And some things like that, or just some, yeah, there's just certain sayings or some words that don't quite translate, and I'm grateful that I can understand what she's trying to say and communicate it back to her as well. So
I think I've had a very similar experience to you. I would say, like, at the end of the day, if someone's passionate about like their culture, I think the most important thing you can do is allow them to embrace it by doing something active. So whether it's not learning even if it's not learning the Bengali language, at least they're doing all these performing arts stuff where they're able to learn more about their culture in that way and then perform it and show others, yes, like, I'm Bengali and this is my culture and this is how I'm expressing it. Because not everyone is going to express their culture in the same way.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, do we have another question?
Any other questions? We don't have time.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have time for any more questions. You can ask us afterwards though.
We can have a long group later.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for listening.